snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, joined again, as always, by our staff writer here at RTI, Ben McKee, and he is also the co-host and producer of the Swain Event Morning Sports Talk Show. Appreciate all of you tuning in to another episode here, and if this is your first time listening, thank you so much for tuning in to the RTI Podcast. Thank you so much for taking time every day to listen to us. You can find all of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts. If you have an Android phone, it should be easy to find in whatever podcast app you use on your Android device. RockyTopInsider.com also has all our podcasts. If you just click on the podcast tab on the homepage, you'll see all of them there, and you can listen to it straight from the webpage or download each episode on whatever device you're using. Also, check us out on YouTube. We're just Rocky Top Insider on YouTube, and we have the podcasts posted there, and that's the way a lot of you interact, and you'll leave comments and stuff on our episodes. And we appreciate all of you who do it that way, and who listen to us that way, and who interact with us that way as well. Ben, we have some interesting stuff to talk about for this episode. Last time we talked, it was Thursday. Tennessee hadn't decided on the starting quarterback yet. The next day, Tennessee goes ahead, and of course all the Jeremy Banks news, and I don't even know if we'll even have time to touch on that in this podcast or not. But you had all the Jeremy Banks news, and then about an hour, or maybe actually long after all that stuff really started coming out, Tennessee went in a good PR move, I guess you'll say, something that you're kind of taught to do in PR. Try to get some positive news out there and put out the story. Chris Lowe had it first from ESPN that Brian Maurer is going to start at quarterback for Tennessee. He goes out, and not only does he start, but he has a really good game against Georgia, at least in the first half, first kind of 2 quarters of the game. And we'll kind of touch more on him here in a minute and talk about kind of what we thought from his play against Georgia and what we think of him moving forward. But the game against the Bulldogs, Tennessee had a 14-10 lead for a good portion of that second quarter. Tennessee led. They were up 14-10, then they were up 14-13. It wasn't until the last 2 minutes of the second quarter where Georgia really turned on the gas, and they ended up getting a 2-score lead before the halftime, and then Tennessee comes out in the third quarter, and Georgia just asserted their dominance. Tennessee got held to 15 yards of offense as a team in the third quarter, and then Georgia couldn't quite pull away. I think it was still 29-14 at the beginning of the fourth quarter, but Tennessee's offense they got stymied big time in the third quarter. Maurer was 1 of 3 with an interception and 0 passing yards. He got sacked twice because they got picked off. Tennessee, I think, had only 15 yards rushing on, I think it was 7 carries in the third quarter. It was ugly. It was brutal. And the fourth quarter comes around, and Georgia kind of puts on some more points quickly. Has that big hit that Maurer took that knocked him out the rest of the game. He got strip sacked, and the fumble was returned 60 yards for a touchdown for Georgia. And that was the bow in the game. Tennessee loses 43-14. I've seen a lot of different people and maybe some Vol fans too. They haven't outright said it, I don't think, and called it a moral victory, but I've seen people more or less calling Saturday's game a moral victory, and I've seen a lot of Georgia fans kind of throw that into Tennessee fans' faces as a derogatory term, saying, "Oh, there's another moral victory for UT, and that's moral victory you," and different things like that. I don't necessarily think, and not even necessarily, I really don't think Tennessee should look at Saturday's game as a moral victory. I think, to me, anytime you lose by 29 points, I don't care if you were, if the spread was, they were 24 or 25 point favorites, and that's only, a 4-point difference between the spread line. Anytime you lose by almost 30 points, anytime you lose by 4 touchdowns in a game, especially to a team that's supposed to be one of your rivals, it's not a moral victory to me. But that's not to say that there weren't positives to be taken away from the game. That's not to say that there's, fans shouldn't have a little more hope after this game than they did, 2 or 3 weeks ago. They've had really kind of the whole season. I don't blame fans at all for having more hope and feeling maybe a little bit better after the game. To me, though, I am not labeling it a moral victory because, yeah, you led in the second quarter against the number 3 team in the nation, but then you gave up 33 unanswered points and still lost by almost 30 points. So to me, it is not a moral victory, but I do think the Vol fans are right in thinking and having a little more hope and more optimism after this game. What are your thoughts on it? Do you think it should count as a moral victory, and just what do you kind of feel moving forward with Tennessee before we talk specifically about Brian Maurer?
Yeah, I do think it is a moral victory, just for the simple fact that there was no morale going into the game. At least it wasn't a positive morale. And my theme going into the game was that Tennessee needed to establish hope for the rest of the season. Tennessee was never going to win that football game. Not saying that anybody did this, but it was unfair, or would have been unfair, to expect Jeremy Pruitt to win that football game, to expect Tennessee to win that football game. So if we don't expect them to win that football game, then what are we looking for during those 60 minutes? And to me, I was looking for hope. I was looking for Brian Maurer to impress. He did that. I was looking for the offense to play more clean football. And yes, they only had 14 points, but the offensive production, aside from the running game, was better. And even in the running game, the bulky stats weren't there for Ty Chandler and Tim Jordan in terms of rushing attempts, in terms of rushing yards. But Tim Jordan rushed for 5.2 yards per carry, and Ty Chandler rushed for 5.4 yards per carry. That is really good against a very good Georgia front seven. Defensively, it was just an utter mess, just a cluster. And maybe I shouldn't say the game was a moral victory from a team standpoint, but I think it was a moral victory for the offense, because I definitely think the offense kind of won in a way on Saturday. They went up against one of the best teams in the country and was toe-to-toe with them for 2 quarters, 2.5 quarters really. And then once Brian Maurer kind of got banged up a little bit and Georgia made some adjustments, and Jeremy Pruitt said it wasn't even necessarily adjustments that they made. They were making the same calls. It was Tennessee quit executing for over half the game. Tennessee's offense played decent. Did they play great? No, but they played decent, and that is a huge step up from what happened against Florida 2 weeks prior. So I do think it is a moral victory, just because when I think of a moral victory, to me it is, a win within the game is kind of what I think of as a moral victory. Should you hang your hat on a moral victory? No, absolutely not. Tennessee should be disappointed. Tennessee should not be pleased with the result. But I do think generating hope is somewhat – I think generating hope and saying there were positives to take away from the game is just another way of saying there's kind of a moral victory. The game went better than we expected. The final score was ugly, but, part of those 7 points that prevented Tennessee from covering was the fact that Brian Maurer was killed, laid out flat on the floor of Neyland Stadium, and Georgia picked up the fumble and ran it back for a touchdown. So, I mean, to me, it was a moral victory, and I'm okay with saying that, as long as Tennessee is not, hanging their hat on it. That's when it becomes a problem, because that's what Butch Jones was doing. Jeremy Pruitt is not happy with the result and the final score. But I do think from a fan standpoint, it is okay to be kind of pleased with a moral victory, because there was no morale going into that game. There weren't a lot of positives, and now there is hope for the remainder of the season in individual games outside of the Alabama game in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think it's a fair take, and I guess maybe I am just kind of arguing semantics, because I guess you could say that I'm calling it a moral victory by what I said. And I agree with you. I think, to me, why I'm not calling it one is because, like you said, I think with me, a moral victory, maybe I just got poisoned by the Butch Jones era, where a moral victory seemed to be something where, like you said, you hang your hat on it. Like, it's look, this is almost as good as a win. And I don't think this team's doing that. From things we saw and heard from Pruitt on Saturday, I mean, his comments after the game were, I don't want to say they were strong, but they were pretty emphatic about this not being good enough still. I think one of the reporters asked him along the lines of, how do you preach to the team that, obviously they're showing improvement, but the results still aren't there. And he's like, well, our goal is to win every single game. He's like, this still isn't good enough. He's like, I don't care what the results say. If it's not a win, it's not good enough. So I think this team's not doing that. And like I said, I guess I am arguing semantics, and I guess I got a little used to more negative connotations from moral victories because, like you said, Ben, I mean, Butch Jones and his staff, or I guess specifically just him, they made it such a big deal about moral victories, talking about, winning 18 games in the last 2 seasons, have the most success in the program since about 10 years ago, wherever he said now, and that was infectious. That was, that's a small part of the culture he left behind, but that speaks to the culture that Butch Jones left behind. That was considered, like you were saying, that was considered really good stuff that they did. That's what Butch Jones and some of his players and coaches felt like they were doing really good things by winning 9 games in a season, but failing to win the SEC East in back-to-back seasons when they were competing for it, and it definitely should have won it at least one of those years. I don't think that's ever going to happen with this coaching staff. Pruitt's going to have some things where he's going to say and do things where fans are going to disagree with him. He's already done that this year specifically. And there's been times, Ben, where you and I both have disagreed with things he's said or how he's handled things. I know specifically after the Georgia State game, you were up, you disagree with the way he kind of handled the press conferences and things like that. But he's not done anything like this where, he hasn't come out after the Georgia game and said, well, that was pretty good. Yeah, we did better than I thought we were going to do. No, he was still very critical of, he gave praise where praise was needed. He talked about today, we're recording this on Monday, Brian Maurer, he said he had more positives than negatives in the game. And he said there were a lot more positives than negatives, but there were still things he needs to learn from, and moving forward, he's got to learn not to make the same mistakes over and over. And I think that's a good kind of way to transition here to talk about Maurer a little bit more. Ben, we've both kind of talked about it separately. We haven't talked about it together, but I talked about it on our post-game show on YouTube on Rugged Top Insider, the RTI post-game show, and you talked about it a lot with Swain on his show on Monday. What I want to talk a little bit briefly here, then talk about the future too. But looking back at Maurer's game on Saturday, I don't know if you've had a chance to go back and rewatch the game any. I haven't had a chance to watch a whole lot of it besides some highlights and stuff here and there. But I was fairly impressed by what Maurer did, and putting it more into context too. I mean, not just the numbers and the way he played, but you look at the defense he played against. And I know Georgia's secondary isn't. Georgia's secondary is probably their weakness, but it's still their secondary would be a strength for a lot of different football teams. It would be a strength for Tennessee. I'll put it that way. Tennessee's secondary has not been good this season, but if Tennessee had the secondary that Georgia had, it would be a more of a strength than what Tennessee has right now. So their weakness is still, better than a lot of teams' strengths, because Georgia is just, they're very good. They're very talented, and they do a good job playing in the game. Putting it in context, playing against a defense that coming into the game, I looked this up, coming into the game in their previous 4 games before playing Tennessee, they were allowing only 4.15 yards per play to opposing offenses. Tennessee in the game got 5.5 yards per play, and that was the most yards per play Georgia has given up this season so far. I guess you can throw that into the into the moral victory category, but to me, Ben, I thought, even looking at Maurer's performance in a vacuum, when you weren't even considering who he was playing against, when you're watching him play, and just the things he was doing, I thought he played well. Then you consider that he's playing against potentially the best defense he's played this season. I guess you could argue the Florida defense is probably a little bit better overall. But front seven wise, I mean, Georgia has probably the best linebacking core in the SEC. The only other front seven I'd put ahead of theirs maybe would be Auburn's, because they have a really good defense too. But Florida, Auburn, and Georgia have probably the 3 best defenses in the SEC right now. I thought, all things considered, Maurer had a pretty solid game, and I thought that was probably one of the better debuts of a Tennessee quarterback that I've seen in my time of covering Tennessee and being a fan.
No, absolutely. I was incredibly impressed by Brian Maurer. He finished 14 of 28, only completing 50% of his passes, but he showed me enough in that sample size to think that Brian Maurer is absolutely capable of leading Tennessee to a win over Mississippi State this weekend, South Carolina in 3 weeks, obviously UAB, Kentucky on the road, Missouri on the road, especially with the injury to Missouri linebacker Cale Garrett, who was having an All-American type season. He is out for the year, and he was the heart and soul of that defense. So he is capable of leading Tennessee to a win on the road in Missouri and then back home against Vanderbilt as well. So that doesn't mean that will actually happen. I just like Tennessee's chances based off of the quarterback play, and that's kind of what I said going into the Georgia game, is that not necessarily about Brian Maurer when we were just, talking about the games in general, but I truly believe, going into the Georgia game, Tennessee was good quarterback play away from being 3-1. I truly believe that. Not only being 3-1, but having a chance to beat Florida on the road, because if JG makes some of those passes and doesn't turn the ball over, Tennessee has a shot to win that game in the third and fourth quarters. That doesn't mean they would have happened, but they would have at least had a chance. So I thought, the bad quarterback play was a huge, really the biggest only factor as to why Tennessee was 1-3 going into that game. Tennessee beats BYU and Georgia State with good quarterback play. Simple as that. So and with that quarterback play ahead of the quarterback change, that's why a lot of people were down on the rest of the season. But with the way Maurer commanded the offense, showed poise, showed great pocket presence, his throws were just incredibly accurate, had a ton of zip on it. He anticipated the throws well. He threw his wide receivers open. The Marquez Callaway bomb for a 73-yard touchdown was absolutely beautiful. I don't remember the last time I saw a deep ball for a touchdown where the receiver caught it in stride, and that's exactly what Callaway did. So based off of that poor quarterback play at the beginning of the season and then the sample size against Georgia, I mean, I have all the optimism in the world that Maurer can take that, learn from his mistakes in the Georgia game, and go out and lead Tennessee to a win over Mississippi State and all the other games on the schedule that I mentioned outside of Alabama, of course. Now, that doesn't mean it will happen. I continue to say that. Tennessee's defensive line really needs to start generating a push, or opposing offenses are just going to continue to put up a ton of points. But if the Tennessee defense can play bend but don't break defense like they did at times against Georgia, like they did at times against Florida, like they did the whole game against BYU until overtime, if they can do that, then I mean, we're looking at a different end to the season than we had to start to the season. If you can really have some momentum going into December when recruiting is starting to wrap up, that's a completely different outlook on the program in December than what we had after Tennessee loses to Georgia State and then after Tennessee starts 1-3. So I think Maurer has completely changed the outlook on the season moving forward. And again, I can't stress it enough. Maurer himself isn't going to get Tennessee to even 4 wins or 5 wins, or if hell freezes over and a miracle happens, 6 wins. Maurer himself isn't going to do it. He's going to need, and I'm more so speaking about the defense when I say this, but he's going to need help. The offensive line continues to progress game by game. Tennessee's receivers are going to have a chance to absolutely eat the rest of the season, even against Alabama. Alabama's defense is very banged up, very young, inexperienced. Even against Alabama, Tennessee's receivers are going to have an advantage the rest of the season. So, you pair the receivers with improved quarterback play, an offensive line that continues to get better and better, a tight end that's capable of playing in the NFL, or a good running back room, not a great running back room, but a good one that is good enough to get the job done. The offense really should take off from this point forward. It's the defense that may prevent Tennessee from doing so. But I say all that to say Brian Maurer's performance against Georgia changed the outlook on the season. Now, I will put an asterisk next to it and say, let's hold our horses. While I am on the optimist side of it, there is the possibility that it could have been a flash in the pan. I don't believe that to be true, but, this is why I was so surprised by the game and by his performances, because there was nothing in the UTC game from Maurer or in the Florida game from Maurer or even practice in the month of August and the month of September or back in the spring that showed us that he was going to go out there and do that. Nothing indicated that. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. So it could be a flash in the pan, but I don't believe it is. And overall, I think it's changed the outlook on the season and given Tennessee's team, coaches, and fans a lot of reason for optimism and hope.
That thought has circulated through my mind too, Ben, of what if this was a pretty good performance because he was fired up in his first start. What if he comes out and bombs the next game? I've had that exact same thought. And like you said, I don't think that's the case. And I also think that while you're right about him not really showing anything that would indicate that he was going to have that type of performance on Saturday, I also don't think he's just really been given an opportunity to really show a whole lot. And in practice, he definitely has it. Yeah, you and I both have seen him in practice, and Swain's seen him in practice, and who gets to see more practice than we do. And he hasn't shown that really in practice. He's shown more of a propensity to turn the ball over more in practice than he even did on Saturday, and that's been what's kept him out, because he obviously has talent, and we saw that even in his minor appearances against UTC in Florida, where he has some pretty good arm talent. He's mobile. You saw that in high school too. He's a good leader on the field for his team in high school, and he obviously showed that against Georgia. But we didn't see a lot of this stuff. But the reason why he wasn't playing was because Pruitt and Jim Chaney and everybody thought, Garantano gave Tennessee the best chance to win because he was less prone, to turn the ball over. He was not going to be the one to commit those big mistakes that were, going to take Tennessee out of games. But then Garantano started doing that this season. He started making those mistakes that took Tennessee out of games. That wasn't the same Garantano that was playing in 2018 as what we've seen in 2019. So then the move was made, and he shined. And that's not to say that Mauer's a gamer, because he still made mistakes in the game. To me, he didn't do enough against Georgia, and I said this after the game on Saturday too. He didn't do enough to me in that game to really solidify that he is for sure Tennessee's quarterback of the future. But he gave enough hope and did enough in that game to make me think, and I'm sure a lot of all fans think, that hey, Tennessee, there's 5 wins, maybe 6 wins is on the table for the season now because of that. And you saw how well Tennessee played as a team. I mean, obviously, like we said, Tennessee still lost by almost 30 points, and that's not excusable. That's not an acceptable level of play for Tennessee moving forward. But we can consider where Tennessee is depth-wise, where Tennessee is talent-wise compared to where Georgia is depth-wise and talent-wise, and how Tennessee played in that first half. And really, they still had it as a 2-score game heading into the fourth quarter, just like they did in Athens last year. It was still good to see from that perspective. So all of that to get to this point, talking about Brian Maurer. And actually, before we kind of get to more of what we see from the future with him, Ben, you touched on something that maybe remember something I've seen from fans on social media this week. Not by a whole lot, but definitely some fans have said this, and some have said it kind of in a joking way, but I've definitely seen some say it seriously. I've seen people talk about or say that if Brian Maurer had started the whole season, Tennessee would be 3-2 right now. I don't think that's the case, because I don't think the Brian Maurer you saw in against Georgia, I don't know that was the same Brian Maurer Tennessee had at the start of this season. I think he's a true freshman. I think he's actually learned quite a bit, I think, from the bench and watching what not to do by watching Jarrett Garantano play. And I think he also had more motivation and got more confidence in himself as the season went along, because he felt, hey, I can battle and get the starting job and take it away from a redshirt junior. I don't know that if Tennessee started, I think if they started Brian Maurer, they maybe they beat Georgia State, because I think there's a different type of focus in that game with a true freshman quarterback playing, and I think the offense will be more focused and defense will be more focused, because they're saying, hey, we got to make sure that this young guy doesn't lose this game for us. But I don't know that Tennessee plays. Maybe they beat BYU. I don't know. To me, it's really hard to say that if they start Brian Maurer, Tennessee is 3-2. Maybe you disagree, but I just don't think that that's the case. I think the Brian Maurer Tennessee got on Saturday, October 5th, was a different version of Brian Maurer than what Tennessee had, on August 31st when the season began.
Yeah. So I see. I don't disagree or agree with that point. I think both sides make sense, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Again, in terms of arguing that they would be 3-2 right now, I think I may lean towards that one if I had to pick a side, simply because the throws that JG missed against BYU. Or let me back up to the Georgia State game.
Yeah.
I think Tennessee could play Georgia State 10 more times for the rest of the season with Jarrett Garantano as the quarterback, and Tennessee would win that football game. Like, I truly believe that was a fluke game, just based off of how Tennessee has played at times since then. I truly believe that. So I definitely think that would be a win, because if Brian Maurer was starting those games against Georgia State, I think Tennessee would also win those games. A lot of the reason, really, yes, Jarrett Garantano did not play well in that football game, but he wasn't the number 1, number 2, or number 3 reason why Tennessee lost that football game. Again, he did not play well, but he was not a top 5 reason as to why Tennessee lost that game. Tennessee lost that game primarily because they could not line up correctly on defense, and then 2, when they did get lined up, wherever they were lined up on the field, speaking of the defense, they didn't play with heart or they didn't hustle. Like that, I put that game on the defense and the pathetic effort that they had. And then, the offensive line has played much better this season, but it did not play well against Georgia State. It did not. JG was pressured a ton. So, yes, quarterback play could have been better in that game, but that was more of a team loss, whereas the BYU game, I do solely put on the shoulders of Jarrett Garantano, because you go back and you watch that game, and he missed so many guys wide open, so many touchdowns, so many points were left on the field because of JG's inability to see the open man or throwing it to them late. Brian Maurer, I promise you, makes those throws. And I say that because the guys were so wide open. If an SEC quarterback isn't making those throws, he doesn't need to be in the SEC. If a Tennessee quarterback is not making those throws, he does not need to be the quarterback at Tennessee. So I do tend to agree with the fact that Tennessee would be 3-2 right now with Brian Maurer, but I can also see the people who would disagree because of kind of what I was saying about the Georgia game potentially being a flash in the pan. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that that was a one and done from Brian Maurer. I don't think it was his 15 minutes of fame. I think that is sustainable, and I think he did show signs of promise for the future, but there's no guarantees is what I'm getting at. There was no indication, as I said earlier, no indication that Maurer was going to play the way that he did. There was no indication. So who's to say that he would just automatically turn it around and play the same, against BYU, against Georgia State? So I tend to agree with the people that say Tennessee would probably be 3-2. You could definitely, I think you would even agree, Nathaniel, if I told you Brian Maurer played the way he did against Georgia in the first half, against BYU and against Georgia State, Tennessee would definitely be 3-2 right now. But I do understand where people are coming from, saying, let's hold our horses, because you had not seen that yet, and there's no guarantee that he would have played that way.
Yeah, absolutely. If he played how he played against Georgia, or really anywhere close to that, you're absolutely right. Tennessee would be 3-2 because they would have beaten Georgia State. And granted, like you said, Garantano wasn't the biggest reason Tennessee lost that Georgia State game, but he was a big reason, if not the number one reason, why Tennessee lost against BYU. And you're right. If Maurer plays the way he does against Georgia, or anywhere close to how he played against Georgia in those games, Tennessee wins, or at least they should have won, unless something else just devastating happened in either of those contests. I think more of the reason I brought it up, I think it's just a good topic to discuss too. One of the reasons I brought it up was because I've seen people kind of use that as an indictment on Jeremy Pruitt, but that's why I said what I said, and why we both, I think, agree that I don't think it's the obvious move. Looking back on it, maybe in hindsight's always 20/20. In hindsight, maybe he should have made the move, but like we said, Maurer didn't really show anything in his first 2 appearances, and definitely didn't show anything in the spring, summer, and fall to make anyone think that was going to be the type of player you were going to get, and that he was going to be definitely a better quarterback for Tennessee than Jarrett Garantano to start the season. That just wasn't the case. So I brought it up more because I've seen people talk about it being kind of an indictment on Jeremy Pruitt, and that it's it showed that, hey, maybe he made the wrong decision, and that he just has this this affinity for Jarrett Garantano. Heading into the season, you would have been hard pressed to find, unless you were just a big Jarrett Garantano hater, someone who just was just going to not believe in Garantano no matter what. You would have been hard pressed to find someone who had thought that either one of the freshman quarterbacks were going to be the better option for Tennessee starting out for the entire season, for all 12 games at the beginning of the season. So to me, that's kind of what I brought it up, because I think it was, people are using it as an indictment against Pruitt, I think, are in the wrong, or maybe just kind of looking for reasons to get angry at Pruitt, because like we both have said multiple times in this podcast, Maurer showed some good things in practice and in games, but he didn't show anything that was going to indicate that he's going to play the way he did on Saturday. But you're also right. If he played the way he did on Saturday, or close to it, Tennessee definitely would be 3-2 at this point, or maybe even 4-1. I don't think they upset. I don't think they upset Florida if Maurer starts and plays the way he did against Georgia. But never know, and we won't never know because we won't ever get to redo that one. But moving forward, Ben, with the I think you can take out the Alabama game. That's going to be an obvious loss, and unless some just gigantic miracle happens on the third Saturday in October when that game kicks off. It'll be 9 o'clock at night, by the way, so that's going to be a late one. If you have kids, they might as well just go ahead and sleep through it anyway. But if you want to tell them to go to bed at halftime, just don't keep them up. It's not worth it. I hate that I'm going to have to stay up that late to watch that game and cover it. But it is 8 o'clock Central Time, so it'll be a little earlier for all of you in Alabama or in Central Time. But anyway, aside from that game, and I would still say Missouri. I know Missouri lost Cale Garrett for a while, and there's a good chance he's probably out or limited when Tennessee does play the Tigers. And they also have a few more people banged up and injured. That game's still a little further off. Missouri has a really good pass defense. They actually have, according to the statistics, have the number 1 pass defense in the SEC. I think you could argue that Florida has a better one because they've picked off 12 passes this season, and teams are only completing 57% of their passes against that Florida secondary. A lot of that's also because of Florida's front seven. But Missouri this season, opponents have only completed 47% of their passes against them for 692 yards, 3 touchdowns, 7 picks, and they're only giving up 138 passing yards per game. And it's not like they've played a bunch of nobodies. I mean, they haven't played a loaded schedule. They did lose to Wyoming. Wyoming didn't throw the ball a whole lot. West Virginia only completed about 60% of their passes, 141 yards, 3 picks. South Carolina, that was Ryan Helinski in that game. He didn't have a great game, completed less than 50% of his passes. Actually had the most yards against Missouri this season so far with 255, but a touchdown and interception. And then against Troy, less than 60% completion percentage, 150 yards, a touchdown and 2 picks. I don't even want to count Southeast Missouri State. That's a FCS school. But that's all, granted, Missouri hasn't played a great offense yet, so, I think their numbers will hurt, but they still have a good pass defense. But then outside of Bama and Missouri, Tennessee doesn't have a team on their schedule remaining in the SEC that has a top half pass defense in the SEC. Kentucky's has been okay. They're 8th in terms of passing yardage allowed. They've only given up 3 passing touchdowns on the year, have 5 interceptions. But Mississippi State's passing defense is not great. South Carolina's has been horrible. Vanderbilt's is awful. It's the only one that's worse is Ole Miss, and it's not by a whole lot. Actually, I would say Vanderbilt's is worse because they're only 3 yards. Ole Miss has only given up 3 more yards per game through the air. Vanderbilt's only picked off 2 passes. Ole Miss has picked off 5. Both teams have given up 13 touchdown passes, and Vanderbilt's giving up 9 yards per attempt this season. That is easily the worst in the SEC right now, and they've been torched through the air a few different times. So Ben, like I said, aside from Alabama, and I think you could throw in Missouri too, Tennessee's schedule, not just from teams overall, but from a pass defense perspective, there's a good chance that Brian Maurer could end up having, assuming he's going to start the rest of the season. I kind of want to touch on that too, if we both think it'll happen, if he'll be the starter of the whole season. But what is your outlook for Brian Maurer? I look at that schedule, and I think he's obviously going to have a tough time against Alabama. Tennessee hasn't had a quarterback have a good game against Alabama in a very long time. I guess even the year Tennessee got close under Josh Dobbs in 2015, it wasn't like Dobbs had a phenomenal game himself. That game, Hurd actually had a pretty good game for what I remember. But it wasn't like Tennessee's offense was on fire. They just kept that game defensively very close. Tennessee I don't think the offense is going to have a very good time against Alabama. I know Alabama's defense is not what it normally is because they have playing a lot younger guys, especially on the front seven. But aside from that game, then like I said, I think the Missouri game, I think Brian Maurer, like we both have said, assuming this Saturday wasn't a flash in the pan, he has a good chance to go out and really be able to keep Tennessee in games and to play against some defenses that aren't going to probably test him nearly as much as what Georgia did and what Florida did. His 2 games he's played the most in, Florida and Georgia, those are probably the 2 toughest defenses he's going to face outside of, like I said, an Alabama or Missouri are both pretty tough too. But those are, I think, 2 of the toughest games or teams he could have played to start his Tennessee career. From here on out, aside from those 2 games, I think he's got a chance to turn in a pretty solid, maybe the best freshman quarterback season, assuming he doesn't get hurt and assuming he keeps a starting job. I think he could have the best freshman quarterback season since Tyler Bray in 2010, and that's been almost a decade ago at this point.
Yeah, and that sounds probably better than what it actually will be, just because there haven't been a ton of freshman quarterbacks to play.
Yeah.
I guess JG truly started playing when he was a sophomore. Played redshirt freshman after Dormady got hurt. Has there been another freshman to play? I mean, Dobbs came in.
Dobbs plays a freshman in 2013. Worley,
right, but he only played that last month.
Yeah, Worley played he played one game as a freshman in 2011. So I mean that doesn't really count either.
No, but Brian Maurer, I definitely agree with your statement that he has the capability of really having a nice end to the season. Really not even into the season, because he's taking over well before the last month. I mean, he has the opportunity to have, a really nice second half of the season. And not only that, but if he plays like he did against Georgia in the first half, the rest of the way, I mean, he'll lock up the quarterback job for next year. I don't even think that it would be a quarterback battle at that point if he plays like he did against Georgia in the first half, against South Carolina, Mississippi State, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Missouri, and UAB. If he plays like that, Tennessee wins probably. How many games is that? 7, or not 7, but 6?
I miscounted, but yeah,
he wins most of those football games. Is my point. Yeah. If he plays like he did against Georgia, I truly believe that. Unless the defense just continues to just play terribly, but we also have to remember that the defense isn't going to go up against Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift and those receivers in that offensive line every week anymore either. Really the only truly tough offense that Tennessee is going to face the rest of the way is Alabama. So he has the potential to really have a nice second half of the season, and I think what really helps him is Marquez Callaway and Juwan Jennings. Those are two really nice veteran receivers to be throwing the football to, two future NFL guys. So as you kind of laid out the stats there about how the teams remaining on a schedule have underperformed against the pass, there's no reason Brian Maurer can't have big games as long as he takes care of the football, as long as he is making the correct pre-snap reads, and then obviously during the play going through his progressions correctly, in which that also falls on Jim Chaney to make sure that he is simplifying things for the freshman, and then as he progresses, slowly add things into the offense, add wrinkles in here and there. That falls on Jim Chaney, and I absolutely trust Jim Chaney to do that. But there's no reason that Brian Maurer, assuming the offensive line continues to progress, assuming the receivers stay healthy, assuming that Tennessee can be better in the run, which, again, I think they will, because they really don't face another tough defense the rest of the way. I mean, again, Ole Miss, who doesn't have a very good offense, put up 30 points on Alabama. I think it might be unfair to expect Tennessee to put up 30 against Alabama, but there's no reason Tennessee can't have a quarter or a half of success against Alabama like it did Georgia. Alabama's defense is much worse than Georgia's. People are getting caught up on Tua Tagovailoa and those receivers that they have, Najee Harris, that offensive line, Nick Saban, the name Alabama. People are all caught up on that. Those are the strengths of Alabama's football team. There isn't a strength on defense for Alabama, and that's why Alabama is going to get beat at some point, and they're not going to win a championship this year. So there's not a tough defense like a Georgia or a Florida remaining on the schedule. And in my mind, assuming that Saturday's first half against Georgia just wasn't an anomaly, there's no reason that Brian Maurer can't have a really strong finish to the year, especially when you consider the pieces he has to work with.
Yeah, I also almost wonder, and I'll ask this question in a roundabout way to you too. I almost wonder if he has kind of that Tyler Bray effect in 2010. I mean, he's been likened to Tyler Bray already a little bit, just because both are the kind of way they have the moxie and the swag, and then as a passing ability too. But Tyler Bray came in, and obviously he didn't have to play against Alabama or against a Georgia or teams like that in his first year in the last month of the season. But he came in against a softer schedule like Brian Maurer is going to be able to do. Like I said, except for Alabama and probably Missouri, he does have a pretty soft schedule over definitely the last month of the season in November. But Tyler Bray came in and sparked that team. They were 2-6 when Bray took over, and he comes out and helps that team win their last 4 games of the season. And he also played pretty well in the Music City Bowl against North Carolina, and he sparked the team. But obviously, Bray didn't have a great head on his shoulders. We'll just say what it is. I mean, he wasn't the best leader on the team as far as he got older. He kind of had trouble maturing and wasn't really held accountable by his coaches either. I think being held accountable won't be a problem with the current coaching staff, and I think Brian Maurer will have a better head on his shoulders than what Tyler Bray did. So I really do wonder, and I'm looking forward to seeing if Maurer can have that Bray effect on this season of coming in and taking over from an older quarterback and sparking an offense that that 2010 offense was struggling for pretty much the whole season until Bray came in and once again against a softer schedule, played Memphis, played Ole Miss when they were terrible, played Kentucky and played Vanderbilt, and helped Tennessee get to the bowl game. Ben, I'm not ready to say Tennessee's going to make a bowl game. I definitely am not ready to say Tennessee's going to get the 6 wins in a bowl this year. But what do you think kind of the realistic ceiling or the realistic expectations now are for Vol fans? I think it's still a little early to try to figure that out because, as we both said, this is one game for Maurer. It's one game. It could be a flash in the pan. We don't think it is, but it definitely could be one because we just don't know. This is the only time we've seen him start. It's the only time we've seen him play a full. He technically didn't play a full game, but the only time we've seen him play a full game so far in his career. But based off what you saw Saturday, projecting forward to realizing Tennessee is an inconsistent team, even before they had a true freshman at quarterback, who he's definitely going to have some inconsistencies. You can go back and look at all the true freshmen who have started and played in multiple games for Tennessee. I think of Eric Ainge in 2004 had a really good game against Florida. He wasn't starting technically, but had a good game against Florida, and then come out in his actual first start against Auburn, had a horrible game, bounced back and had a good game against Georgia. So, I mean, that was back and forth. Brent Schaefer had a back and forth kind of time as the second guy there. Bray, I mean, that's a little harder to say because he didn't play anybody really well, but Dobbs didn't have a great start to his freshman season either. Clausen, I think Casey Clausen might be the only one that had kind of a pretty fairly consistent freshman campaign. Even then, he had games where he didn't play as good as others. Even Peyton Manning didn't have a great, a super consistent freshman season because that's just what freshmen do. They aren't known for their consistency. It's very rare that you have the guys like the Tua Tagovailoas or the Jake Fromms who, as true freshmen, come in and very rarely have kind of bad games, or their worst games are still games that are good enough to help you win the football game. So, Ben, projecting forward a little bit, what do you think are realistic expectations win-loss wise for Tennessee the rest of the season? Because I actually think 5 wins is on the table for Tennessee, and I don't think it's crazy to say that. I think it's a little crazier to say 6-6. Even that it's on the very, very, very far kind of improbable end. But it still could happen. I think 5-7 could actually happen because I think you're going to see Tennessee lose to Alabama. I still think they lose to Mississippi State. I just do. Mississippi State coming off a bye week, they're not very impressive, but I still think coming off a bye week and getting them healthier, and Tennessee had a few guys get banged up in this past game against Georgia, I think State still wins that game, and I think Tennessee will lose to Missouri. But I actually do genuinely believe the rest of the games on the schedule Tennessee can, and I think probably, if I had to go on record today, I'll say that win those games, and I think that's a 5-7 record, which before the season started, you would not take at all. You would have said this would be a disaster of a season, and you still feel it. It's definitely not where Tennessee should be at this point. But the way the season started, I think 5-7 would be. It would look a lot better, recruiting wise. It would look a lot better fan base wise heading into next year than what you thought could happen. It's definitely not where Tennessee should be, and it would not be acceptable in my opinion. It would still be it would be a bad grade for the season overall, but you would be salvaging something if you go 5-7, and I think 5-7 is pretty reachable at this point, assuming Brian Maurer doesn't have a major regression or doesn't get hurt or anything like that. I think Tennessee could get to 5-7 this season.
No, they could. There are 7 games remaining. Tennessee is 1-4, and it is possible. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think it's very likely, but it is possible that in Tennessee's 7 remaining games, they win every single one of them except for the Alabama game. They could finish the season 6-1. I don't think it is going to happen. I don't think that there's a great chance of that happening, and that's partly because of the defense. There are going to be games where the defense is just lit up, and it's not going to matter what the offense does, kind of like the Georgia game there for 3 quarters. But they could also go 1-6 in those games. I mean, Tennessee has enough holes to where the only game they win the rest of the way is the UAB game. But I don't think that is very likely, and I don't think that happens either. I think it'll be somewhere in the middle where it's like they go 7 games left, they go probably 3-4 or 4-3. I tend to think they actually go 4 and I'm trying to think. It's hard to do all this math in my head. I went to journalism school, not math school, but kind of game by game. I think they beat Mississippi State this weekend. I think they lose to Alabama and South Carolina. I think they beat UAB. I think they beat Kentucky. I think they beat Vanderbilt. So, what's that? 4 more wins the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they end up going 5-7, like you do. And it's not even necessarily a Tennessee thing. It's more so I haven't seen enough from the other teams on the schedule to make me think that Tennessee can't win those games. And Vanderbilt, in my opinion, is by far the worst team in the SEC. Tennessee should beat UAB. I like Tennessee's chances over Mississippi State. That defense is not good, and if the offense shows up, I do think that Tennessee's defense can play enough bend but don't break style of play to where they can win that game. South Carolina, I think they have too physical of a front seven for Tennessee to handle, which is why I think them and Missouri will beat Tennessee. Kentucky, they are abysmal on offense, so I think Tennessee finishes the season 5-7. And you were talking about at the beginning of the season, obviously you would not take that, and it would be an overall failing grade for you at the end of the year. I don't know that it would be for me. I think it'd be like a C. I think it'd be like barely passing because, there were media members that wanted to say, yeah, I kind of expect 8 wins this season. I think Tennessee can get to 8 wins this season. And I did not rule that out just because you did have a lot of players returning. You have a great coaching staff. Theoretically, you had a fourth-year quarterback leading the way. You expected, members of the defense to take a step forward. So I didn't rule it out, but I didn't think it was possible. And my thing was when people were saying that was, what if this team isn't capable of winning 8 games, which has proven to be the case? It is absolutely proven to be the case that this team, this roster, is not capable of winning 7 to 8 games. So what if 5 and 6 wins is actually about where this team should be? Pruitt is actually meeting the line. He's not crossing the line. He's not exceeding expectations. But what if this is a truly 3 or 4 win roster, which was the case last year and they won 5 games? What if that's the same case this year with the same roster essentially and they win 5 or 6 games? To me, that is a somewhat passing grade. Again, it's not where you want to be. It's not acceptable, but we have to remember just where this roster currently is. It's terrible. The lack of talent on defense is abysmal. And the lack of, effort at times from the defensive side of the ball is miserable. The lack of intelligence, the lack of football IQ from Tennessee's secondary, from Tennessee's defensive linemen, from Tennessee's linebackers, not named Daniel Batuli, not named Henry To'o, none of the young guys, is abysmal. It is abysmal. And to expect 7 or 8 wins out of that, I think is ridiculous, which is exactly what I said during the summer. So 5 or 6 wins by Tennessee football standards, yes, that is a failing grade. But I think we need to remember that this 2019 Tennessee football team is not, the Tennessee football program that we know, that we expect to go out there and compete for 10 wins and compete for trips to Atlanta every year. So I do think for the time being, until Pruitt gets his guys back in here, until he gets some recruiting classes and the talent gets back to where it should be, the depth gets back to where it should be, I think that we should lower the expectations, not because, we should be pleased with getting to 5 or 6 wins, but because this team isn't capable of it. I don't know how anybody could think that getting to 7 or 8 wins is possible for this team, because it's just not. They're not talented enough. They don't have enough depth. And I'll ask you this, Nathaniel, and none of this is directed at you. I'm just kind of speaking in general, but outside of the Georgia State game, what have you seen from Jeremy Pruitt against BYU, against Tennessee Chattanooga, against Florida, or against Georgia? In those 4 games, what have you seen from Jeremy Pruitt that you sat there and was like, nope, that was terrible. What a terrible decision. Why is Jeremy Pruitt doing that? He's got to go. What have we seen in 4 games since the Georgia State game? Because the Georgia State game absolutely falls on Jeremy Pruitt. He did not have his team ready to play. That was pathetic. But since then, I personally have not seen a single thing in the UTC, BYU, Florida, and Georgia game that made me stop and think, I don't know about Jeremy Pruitt. I haven't seen a single thing.
No, I would agree with you. Like you said, I definitely felt that way after the Georgia State game. And the BYU game, I thought more, not even in-game stuff. To me right now, in-game wise, I don't know that we can really judge Pruitt a whole lot on his in-game stuff because he doesn't have the talent to do a whole lot in-game. As you were just laying out, the talent's not necessarily there, the effort's not always there, and that's excluding the younger guys because they are giving effort, but the older guys aren't really giving the type of effort you would like to see. But I don't know that we can judge him in-game a whole lot. He's made some in-game decisions where I disagree with him, but it's nothing that's to the point where, like you said, where I think he's not going to get this done. He's not the right guy for the job. He's not going to be a good coach. I just don't know that we know enough at this point from what we've seen from him as an in-game coach to know what he's going to be. But I think from a practice perspective, from a recruiting perspective, I think he's doing a good job, or he's doing as good of a job as I think anyone could in this situation who's never been a head coach before. I mean, we all got to realize that too, that he's never been head coach. That's not to sit here and try to make excuses for the man, because Lord knows, Ben, you and I aren't trying to sit here and make excuses and try to excuse away the Tennessee's 1-4 record. And I know that's not what you're doing either. I'm saying that, to me, for a person who's never been a head coach, who's never realized kind of what he needed to do in certain situations, I think he's doing as good of a job as could be expected of him at this point. He could have done things better. He could have said things better. He could have done things here and there better. But he's learning on the job. He's a second-year head coach. This is the 17th game he's ever coached as a head coach, and he came into a situation that was very, very far off from an ideal situation. And if you want to compare, Kirby Smart and Jeremy Pruitt, I don't know that you could have picked a two more kind of dichotomy of who inherited what program, because really Kirby Smart as a first-time head coach inherited. I wouldn't say that it was a silver spoon type of situation, but he inherited a program that was much healthier than what Jeremy Pruitt inherited. That's not to say that what Pruitt inherited was the worst situation in college football history, but it sure as hell wasn't a good one. It really just wasn't. So to a long way of answering your question, Ben, no, I haven't seen anything aside from the Georgia State game this year where I've sat there and gone, Pruitt's not a good coach. Pruitt's not going to get the job done. I have my questions about him, and to me, I just won't be able to answer some of those questions until year 3 or year 4, because we just don't know what he can do in game a whole lot until Tennessee gets more talent and more depth. He's very handcuffed right now. He and the entire staff. Derek Ansley, Jim Chaney, T. Martin, Chris Wing. I mean, all these coaches, for the most part, except for wide receivers coach David Johnson. And even he's a little handcuffed because they don't have a guy who can take the top off of defense, like what they're going to have with Jalen Hyatt coming in. But with the exception of maybe David Johnson, all these coaches on the staff are pretty handcuffed to what they can do right now because of if it's not talent at a position, it's because of depth. Tennessee's down to 4 scholarship inside linebackers right now, and that's not including guys like Aaron Beasley, a true freshman who is converted from defensive back to practicing with inside linebackers. And you've had a couple of the guys, and Corvus Crouch can move inside if he needs to, but they feel more comfortable with him as an outside linebacker right now because of where he is knowledge-wise with the game. I mean, Ben, to go further in your points, I mean, I just don't know what some fans expect from Pruitt at this point. And this is not an indictment on the fan base. I think for the most part, fans understand, where the program is and what this staff is having to do. And I'm not trying to chastise fans who get angry during games because, emotions run high during games. That's understandable. That's fine. I'm not going to critique anybody. It's afterwards. It's on the Sunday or Monday, or heck, even a Wednesday or Thursday, before games where people are still coming out and saying stuff about in-game adjustments or just coaching decisions. I just don't know that we can really judge him at this point. And I've probably soured on Pruitt a little bit more this season than what I was last year. But I think it's natural when you're 1-4 and Tennessee, they've gotten blown out in 2 games and lost to Georgia State. But I'm not, I'm willing to have my mind changed. I'm not completely sold off the guy or anything like that. Not at all. I just think, to me, it's still too early. I mean, it just really has been. To me, it's too early to really sit here and try to judge and figure out what kind of head coach he can or is or will be or whatever, because we just don't know. Tennessee doesn't have, like I said, it's not talent, it's depth. I mean, they have issues across the board, and it's not going to be fixed in 2 years. It's probably not going to be fixed in 3 years. So I just, to me, it's too early to figure it out. It's too early to really judge him too harshly one way or the other.
No, I mean, I'm absolutely with you. I'm not willing to judge somebody when they don't have their complete tools in the shed. I mean, it's like making a world famous chef, go cook at McDonald's with McDonald's supplies. Like, it just does not make sense. Allow him to cook with his tools, with his recipe. So I think it is insanely early to want Pruitt out of here, and I get why the national media is doing it, and even though I get it, I don't agree with it. They are on this whole Jeremy Pruitt has to go simply because they are looking at the box score. They're not watching the games, because anybody who has a football brain can sit there and watch the games and realize it's not on Jeremy Pruitt. It's really not. The 60 minutes that they were on the football field is not where I have my concerns with Jeremy Pruitt. Where I have my concerns with Jeremy Pruitt is the first-time head coach throughout the week. That's where I have my concerns with Jeremy Pruitt, managing people. That's where I have my concern. Being a bull in a china shop, that's where I have my concern. Not understanding that you're no longer just a football coach, that you are a CEO, and the best football coaches, the Nick Sabans, the Bill Belichicks, they solve problems outside of football. When you're the defensive coordinator, you don't have to deal with the phone call from UT police about Jeremy Banks acting stupid at 3 o'clock in the morning. You don't have to do that when you're the defensive coordinator. Derek Ansley didn't have to deal with that, but Jeremy Pruitt does. And the best coaches solve those problems. They truly do. And that's where Jeremy Pruitt needs to improve the most. And when he does, I think he has the potential to be a very good football coach, because very few coaches know more X's and O's wise. That is 100% truth. And he's a very good recruiter. So once he figures out how to be a head coach, he's going to be perfectly fine.
Well, we could sit here and talk for a lot more or a lot longer about a lot of different things here, because there's a lot to discuss and a lot to talk about. But I think it'll be a good place to end it. We've already gone a little longer than I thought we would here in the podcast. But like I said, there's a lot to talk about from the weekend moving forward for Tennessee. And then we could probably host a podcast every day this week and still not talk about everything we want to talk about. Talk about Tennessee football. And there's also Tennessee basketball if we want to talk about that. We had the practice we touched on a little bit on the podcast last week in the second one. But there's stuff to talk about with basketball, with Jaden Springer visiting this past weekend, and whenever he's going to commit. Tennessee looks like they're still the favorite there, the 5-star shooting guard in the 2020 class. There's stuff we could talk about there too. So it's a busy time right now. As you mentioned, you didn't mention in our podcast, but I think you mentioned it with Will Bowling last week. And you mentioned on Swain's show too. This is the best time of the year for sports fans, because you have football going on, hockey's back, postseason baseball is going on. You have basketball on the horizon, and you have NBA preseason going on. You're getting ready for Vol hoops as well. So it's the best time of the year if you're a sports fan, because you've got a little bit of everything just about all going on all at the same time. But we'll end the podcast here. We really appreciate all of you tuning in and all of you who interact with our show and with our content. Thank you all so much. You can check us out at RockyTopInsider.com. And as mentioned earlier, we're on Apple Podcasts, Android devices, YouTube, at RockyTopInsider.com. There's all kinds of ways you can listen to the podcast, or also check out just all of our content on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're just Rocky Top Insider on all of those. But until next time, this has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.